And this Hangout air is live with Matt and Gene. I am Sigmund Bloom hosting the Hangout, and the Broncos are not playing very well. We are here for you with Matt Harmon elevating the hair game here because apparently I'm going to be the last one on the show, the last old man to try to hold on to my hair. Welcome, everybody, to the show. And Matt Waldman, let's jump right in and welcome Matt Harmon, who you all know, Cecil Lammey on assignment, of course, because it is the Broncos. Matt Waldman, give us a game update and your thoughts here.
Well, you've got the Chargers up 10-3, and they've been pretty much dominating on offense. And Denver really hasn't been able to do too much on offense either on their end. But San Diego's been running a lot of 3 tight end sets and been using them to kind of clear out one side of the field and let either Antonio Gates or mostly Hunter Henry do their work. And they're kind of building off of things that they've done in previous weeks where, last week they had they split out the tight ends in like 2x2 sets, and they had a touchdown to Henry off of a rub route. This time they made it look like there might be a rub route, faked a screen, and hit Henry for the touchdown in the end zone on a slant. And then, they've been able to run the ball very well thus far with Melvin Gordon, who's been pretty creative with some penetration in the backfield and making good choices. Joey Bosa's looked good. He had a really nice play when Trevor Siemian tried to escape the pocket, where he used a couple of moves to spin upfield and then cut back inside to tackle and limit Siemian to just a 1-yard gain. And then with the Broncos, you're seeing Siemian under pressure. They're not able to generate much on the run. Siemian seems to be staring down receivers to one side of the field while C.J. Anderson's running open to the opposite side. He finally hit him once. And every time Anderson does get through the line of scrimmage, there seems to be a holding call. So that's not helping out his prospects. He's had a couple of games wiped out from that. And we're seeing Siemian just not be accurate downfield, and this short passing game that they've been executing from the get-go, it just seems like defenses are getting a little wiser to it.
Yeah, this offense is looking feeble. And Matt, in the week moving in these 4-week periods that you highlight for us, it seems like now that we're getting to that second quarter of the season, Trevor Siemian, Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders not scaring. And, well, Matt Harmon, before we jump into Gene Bramwell and injury notes, wide receivers are your brand. So give me, or if there is one, and you might say the hot take is there is no hot take, the wide receivers in this game, Thomas, Sanders, of course, Tyrell Williams, and Travis Benjamin, who muffed that punt. Even, Dontel Inman, who had a good block on the long, Melvin Gordon. Any burning thoughts right now as you're watching the wide receivers in this game on their fantasy prospects going forward?
Well, I mean, the Broncos duo has seemingly been immune to any sort of offensive struggles around them because their target volume is so great. And Emmanuel Sanders has been the number one this year. And I think I'm interested to see kind of going forward because he's been getting more targets. He's been playing more as that coverage dictating number one. As coverage begins to roll over to him, I'm interested to see how he functions in that role because it's kind of a new thing for him considering where he's been throughout his career. And mostly in Denver, Thomas has been the one. But now it does seem to have officially switched over. And in terms of the Chargers, guys, I think that we're pretty much just going to see kind of almost like a New Orleans light, a wide receiver roulette pretty much every week. But those guys have all settled into roles, and it's crazy what kind of good production they've gotten out of them, even though they don't really have player anymore. All of these guys have contributed and have had positive weeks. In this game, it's been kind of such a weird script so far that we haven't really gotten to see much of them.
No, and don't start your wide receivers against Denver, but maybe start your tight ends or start whoever the linebackers are going to match up against, as we're seeing another good quarterback. And Phillip Rivers. I mean, when you say that, Mr. Harmon, that these guys are still producing, that this offense is still viable without Keenan Allen, without Danny Woodhead, without Antonio Gates for the first 3 weeks of the season. It's Phillip Rivers. He might not ever win a Super Bowl, so he might not get the due he deserves as one of the best quarterbacks in the game, the best injury fantasy expert, defense expert, Gene Bramwell. We're going to go around here, pepper you with questions, Gene. You know the drill on Thursday nights. It'll go me and then Matt Waldman, then Matt Harmon. We'll do a couple of rounds here. And, Gene, let's start with Jordan Reed. It's confirmed he has a concussion, and it's hard to be simplistic about it. But you saw the tweet storm after his concussion. Former players saying, "I don't know. After 6, I might be done." should obviously 6 is concerning, but have we heard anything else that gives us an idea of where this is? Is it at least possible that this goes like a typical concussion recovery, or are we way out of that neighborhood for Reed, and this could be career threatening?
I think it's career threatening. I think you have to consider that it may be. We saw Jordan Cameron, the swirling rumors around him right now is that he's going to retire, and it's sort of a similar situation. Jordan Reed's been a more productive player over the last couple of years than Cameron has been, so there's a little bit there. But I don't know what a typical concussion recovery is anymore. I get the sense, we saw it. Carson Palmer was never going to play last Thursday night, but Cam Newton, I think, you would have expected him to at least have a chance to come back within 8 days. So maybe there's a little bit of a new normal here that we're seeing players take longer than, that 4 to 5 days that we had seen them go through the return to play protocol and come back within a week. And maybe now the standard is going to be closer to 10 days. And you're sort of seeing that with Cam Newton as he's, kind of come back slowly this week too. But I don't think there's any chance that Jordan Reed plays this week. He was having symptoms on Tuesday. He wasn't really diagnosed until overnight Tuesday into Wednesday. So it's just really no chance for him to come back and play, probably even if he hadn't had a history of 4 or 5 concussions. And we're not even sure if 6 is the number. There's good likelihood, it sounds like, with him that he's had multiple others in the past. So I think we'll have a better sense over the next 7 days if Reed is cleared to practice Monday, Tuesday of next week, and then we see him, in some fashion, limited or otherwise, on the practice participation report next Wednesday. Maybe there isn't as much to worry about, but we don't really know anything other than was experiencing symptoms on Tuesday and Wednesday. So you hope it's not a career-threatening situation, but we've seen this with other guys in the past that have had multiple concussions. The teams exercise lots and lots of caution with them.
Well, Gene, I have a related question to that, and if it's something that you feel not comfortable really getting into, I have a contingency question that's just more of a normal one for fantasy owners. But I had read that Suwa Cravens said that he has to wear glasses now because he has difficulty focusing with his eyes on certain objects and different things because of the concussions he's had. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that at all.
So I think the truth was somewhere in the middle there. That's true. There are vestibular symptoms, eye-ear type symptoms where there are balance issues, there are focus issues. It can cause headaches, it can cause blurry vision. That's a known symptom of concussion. It's not a permanent situation. When he said he was, well, I don't know, I shouldn't say that, but it would be unusual for something like that to have already been determined to be a permanent deficit for him. And if that was the case, his career would be over. So I don't think that's where we are with him right now. It's definitely something that, and we talk about it. It's one thing that I don't think most of the public understands, and probably the players don't understand, is you can actually rehab from concussions in the same way, not in the same way, but in the same way that you would rehab from an ankle injury or a knee sprain or something like that. You could rehab from a concussion. It's not the same rehab, obviously, but though the eye can be retrained, and what is the deficits that the symptoms that these guys are experiencing can be recovered a little bit more quickly with rehab. And there are ways to do that. Neuro-ophthalmologists and other folks can do that. So I think that's what Cravens is doing. That's why they have him using the glasses. They probably have him rehabbing that particular set of symptoms pretty aggressively. So I don't think that's going to be a permanent situation. Hopefully we'll see Cravens back sooner or later.
Gene, Sammie Coates' injury is to his lacerated finger, I believe it is. Is that going to be something that keeps him out of Sunday's game, or already affecting a part of his game that already is sometimes an issue that creeps up every now and again?
Yeah, it did last week. We saw the second half of the second quarter and most of the second half, him fighting the ball. He was able to get his hands on the touchdown pass, and I think everybody was sort of taking Ben Roethlisberger's sort of Michael Jordan-like shrug as, hey, I really played well, and I can't believe I threw another touchdown pass. When I think it was, I knew I threw that ball hard. Great job catching that, because I know what your hand looks like right now. That's the way I took it. I don't know if he's going to play this week. Usually and I'm not exactly sure. I've heard finger, I've heard hand, which makes you worried that maybe it's in the webbing of a finger. That's not difficult, but it's more difficult than other injuries to sew up. It takes 8 to 10 days, usually minimum, for those stitches to stay in there. It's not an injury that you want to pop open again, because it becomes that much more difficult to repair if you decide to repair it at all. So I think, it's more than just rest and healing. that did not practice on Wednesday and Thursday for Coates. And if he's not practicing on Friday, I suppose there's a chance that they'll look at his hand and make a different decision on Sunday morning. But I think it's definitely not a non-zero chance that he's not going to play this week. Eli Rogers is back. Marcus Wheaton is not back. He's back on the injury report with a shoulder thing that is limited him off and on all season. Mike Tomlin is a coach that generally does not play players that don't practice. So Friday's pretty big for Sammie Coates. And I'm not saying, we may see him fully practice tomorrow and be fine. But that's one of the 3 or 4 situations this week that we really have to watch carefully tomorrow.
Gene is another one, Eddie Lacy. And we'll get an idea if the Packers may call up Don Jackson from the practice squad. They only have 2 running backs on the roster, and James Starks is actually in worse shape than Eddie Lacy. They still haven't called up Jackson yet. This is a late start, so do we maybe simplify this by saying, hey, even if Lacy plays, his injury, the fact that he's in this game time decision questionable mode means just take somebody over him? Or is the fact that they don't seem to be in a hurry to make a decision on Don Jackson a sign maybe that internally they're a little more optimistic than they're letting on?
I think everybody seems to be optimistic but Lacy. Mike McCarthy said Eddie Lacy's told him that he feels well, and he, despite the high ankle sprain, has been able to do consecutive limited practices on Wednesday and Thursday. And they haven't brought anybody off the practice squad despite every indication saying that between the knee injury and the death in the family that James Starks is not going to be a part of this game plan at all. But Eddie Lacy in the locker room today said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to play. And that's not something you generally hear from players if they feel like they're going to be ready to go. So as another player that we have to pay very close attention to tomorrow, I think the most telling piece of news there is that they haven't brought anybody up, but they have time to do that still. That's going to be the key for us Friday and Saturday. If they decide they need to bring somebody up, it's probably a buffer against Lacy not playing well. But I think, whatever you think about the Dallas defense and the Dallas offense at this point, I think this is likely to be a throwing game for Green Bay anyway. I think this is going to be passing offense much more than rushing offense, regardless which happens with Lacy, Starks, and Jackson.
Gene, you mentioned yesterday about Sammy Watkins and the fact that he's not going to have surgery to address that ongoing soreness, and you were surprised by the fact that he may be able to return, and you qualified that by saying, of course, that he saw one of the leading experts in the country in this matter. So what do you think that this expert might have seen? What are the range of things that he saw, and would you go out and grab him in a redraft league off of a waiver wire? You're on mute, I think.
Still on mute. Yeah, I don't think I would go grab Sammy Watkins unless I could get him for nothing, and I was very confident, or tried to be confident, that I wasn't going to use that roster spot from something else. I'm not sure what's going on with Sammy Watkins. We've seen it with, you saw it with J.J. Watt, you saw it with Eric Decker, you've seen it with so many players where, they miss a couple of weeks, they try to rehab something that probably didn't have a high chance of being able to be rehabbed successfully anyway. We heard time and again that there really wasn't anything structural with Sammy Watkins on an X-ray or otherwise, but it seemed to be localized to the area where he had surgery to fix that bone. And a lot of times, especially with this particular injury, those players progress to, we've seen it, all these revision surgeries over the past couple of years to have that screw revised with or without a bone graft procedure. And when you go from, all right, I got stepped on, I'm going to take a couple extra days, to now you're out for 8 weeks minimum by move to injured reserve, just stands to reason that there's high enough concern with this that, a player wants to progress to surgery. And no player wants to have surgery, and it's always something that you'd like to avoid. And it's nothing but positive that his surgeon and the foremost expert in these metatarsal fractures decided that, yeah, let's give this a chance to rehab for 6 to 8 weeks, if that. But I don't think that surgery is entirely off the table here. If they continue to rehab and we go another 2, 4, 6 weeks, and he's getting closer to the time where he may be able to be designated to return, and he's not any closer, the sooner he has the surgery if that's what's necessary to be done, I still think that's possible. So I think that it's more likely now than it was this time last week that Watkins will be back in uniform at some point this season. But we're still talking, we're going from week 5 and 8 weeks. It's going to be week 14 probably at best before he comes back. And I know I saw some folks tweet about the Bills' prospective playoff schedule looking as good as it does, but I think the percentage chance that you have a productive statistical wide receiver in weeks 15 and 16 is still pretty low.
Gene, both Lions running backs, Dwayne Washington and Theo Riddick, didn't practice the last 2 days. I know Washington aren't really counting on anymore. They just signed Justin Forsett this week. Read on that situation, is Riddick definitely like a guy that you would imagine is going to play on Sunday after playing through, I think, the same injury last week? Or do you think Forsett's a guy that could step in and take major touches right away?
At this point, I'm not sure if they're going to have much choice other than to have Forsett step in. I don't think Zach Zenner looked very effective last week. They were heavily reliant on Theo Riddick when they only had 2 running backs on the roster. I don't think there's not been any indication, unless I've missed something, guys, from Detroit that says what that injury is or what they expect from him. And we have seen Marvin Lewis, to some extent Eric Ebron in the past, where they've had players that don't practice on Wednesday and or Thursday come back to a full practice on Friday and then aren't listed on the game status report at all. That's been the case with Marvin Jones on a couple of occasions. So that's potentially the way this goes. But it didn't even seem like the beat writers, Dave Burkett and others, have a very good read on what's going on yet. So he's another one of those guys where we're going to have a very good sense tomorrow what's going on. If he's not practicing, then I think you can consider him pretty doubtful to play, regardless of what they put on the practice participation and game status report. But it's still well within the range of possibility that he could fully practice tomorrow and play and make the early week much ado about nothing. Because I don't know if you guys watched the game, I didn't see anything in that fourth quarter while Riddick was still playing that showed up as a potential issue there. So did you guys see anything? Is there something I'm missing? No. I think this is just an open question on Friday.
We'll do one more round here for the doc. And I actually quoted you on a radio spot today, Gene, with the idea that players inflate when they give their own measurement of where they are in their recovery, they inflate this. So Willie Snead coming out of the bye saying he's 95%.
He's close to 95%.
Close to 95%. So does this mean that this might be one of those situations that he's not quite right all year, or at least not quite right for a while, if he himself, with the Gene Bramwell inflation factor, is not putting himself at 100%?
I think that's the key, is he's telling you he's not 100%. He's telling you he feels better than he did in week 4, than he did in week 3, but he's not there yet, and he just had 2 weeks off. So he's making progress, but if he's not 100% yet, he's still within the range of potential aggravation, still within the range of a cascade-type injury as he compensates for the injury that he has. I don't know what the difference between 95% and 100% is. I don't know what close to 95% means. We talked about that a lot with Le'Veon Bell over the past couple of years. So what I take those things to mean is that those guys just don't feel like they're fully recovered yet.
Gene, Jeremy Hill, chest injury, shoulder injury, arm in a sling. What's going on with him? Is he going to play?
Yeah, he fully practiced today. Both him and A.J. Green did. And the Bengals have been another one of those teams this year that are not shying away from not practicing their players at all on Wednesday and then skipping over the limited practice and letting them come back to a full practice pretty quickly. And that's what happened with Hill. The way he was hanging that arm down, you wonder if he had a stinger. You wonder if maybe there was a little bit of a shoulder separation. I don't think there was too much more concerning than that. Those are painful injuries for running backs. But if they're letting go full go on Thursday, unless he comes into the locker room tomorrow and isn't feeling well enough to take a full practice, then I don't think we have too much to worry about as far as his availability goes. Whether or not he has an in-game aggravation is, it's the same risk as what we saw last week, which is he may miss a few snaps or a series here or there.
So Josh McCown has been practicing on a limited basis. What's your read on when you think he would come back? Because, this Browns offense still has my interest, especially Terrell Pryor, Corey Coleman, Isaiah Crowell's played really well. Gary Barnage's targets are going up. When would you expect McCown to actually be back on the field?
It doesn't sound like it's going to be this week. He is doing a little bit of limited work, which is good. That's an upgrade from what he's done in the past. But Cody Kessler fully practiced today. Hugh Jackson has essentially said that Kessler's going to be the starter. We could see McCown back sooner than later. I think we're working on a good 4 weeks, a little bit over a month at this point. It's one of those higher grade shoulder sprains. It's a little bit surprising to see Trevor Siemian play through a pretty similar situation. But we heard that McCown's collarbone might have had a little bit of a hairline crack in it. If that's the case, this is going to turn into more of a 6 to 8 week thing than 4 to 6, which is where we are now. So it's nice that he's limited. That probably just means that he's getting some conditioning in and throwing. But until he's cleared for contact, I don't think we can trust that he'll be back.
The best in the business.
Hey, you want to take in a little bit of Dez conversation?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Dez. I was actually going to do a little bonus question for you, Dez. Although okay. I want to remind everybody that Sunday morning, Matt Waldman and Gene and I do a hangout where we get the latest. But we do have an afternoon start with Dez Bryant. He did return to practice. What do you think? Yeah,
and I'm begging to talk about Dez Bryant only to say that I'm not sure. But that's one of the more common questions I've been getting over the last 24 hours is, what do you think? What do you think? And as I said last week, I don't know that I'm super interested in knowing exactly what the injury is at this point. We're just watching practice participation, but he's been freely available during the media portion of practice, and multiple beat writers are taking videos of him running, jumping, cutting. So I think the key with Bryant is he's going to have to prove to the medical staff that he doesn't have any pain, and if he can do that tomorrow, he's chief among these 4 or 5 guys that we have to watch pretty carefully. So I still think that looming Week 7 bye is going to play a role in this. If he is not very close to perfect tomorrow, I think they shut him down for those extra couple of weeks and wait for him to come back until Week 8. But I thought he was a little bit more doubtful yesterday than I do today, so I'm kind of more in the 50-50 range, and if we see him do something in practice tomorrow, I think we may see him play after all.
And so, Gene, because the bye is coming up next week, does that give you, if he is, we hear from Ian Rappaport Sunday morning, Dez Bryant's going to play, does that make you more inclined to tell people, hey, if he plays, then play him, because that means, like you said, he's probably pretty close to 100%, or at least the risks are outweighed by the rewards for the team, so they would be for your fantasy team too.
Yeah, I think so, because the Cowboys have proven in this instance, where they haven't always been in the past, where they'll be. What did that say on this?
Ask me for an indefinite answer. They did that on a T-shirt.
That's what your sign's going to be when
I have a sign.
That's if everyone could hold up a sign of that's like says something about them, that would be, you ask me for an indefinite answer.
But an accurate answer.
That's true.
I can. I'm trying. I'm really trying.
So it's good. So Dez Bryant.
What the heck are we talking about?
We'll check back with you Sunday morning. But go ahead.
Because I think, unlike what they've done in the past, I think they've been cautious with him, and I think it's been pretty clear. Although the injury itself hasn't been clear, their approach has been clear, which is you have to be pain-free, you have to fully practice, or we're going to continue to rest you, because we don't want to take any chance that this injury that we've already rehabbed for 2 or 3 weeks becomes something more important, where it could be 4, 6, 8 weeks later, because this is a team that's clearly pushing for a playoff spot, which hasn't always been the case in the last couple of years, and we're already in Week 6. So if it gets into a situation where he's a candidate for injured reserve, it is very late into the season right now, and there's just no reason to risk that. So if they allow him to play this week, I don't think they're putting him on the field just as a decoy against Green Bay.
And going back, of course.
How's that? That definitive?
Yeah. That was definitive. On a Gene Bramwell definitive scale, that was at least 8 or 9 out of 10. Much more definitive than the ruling on whether Dez Bryant caught that ball 2 years ago. In Green Bay, we are so lucky. We're so blessed to get to be joined by Dr. Gene Bramwell. And again, you got Dr. Gene Bramwell's updates on Sunday morning. We will have our hangout Sunday morning. You got to follow on Twitter, the most essential injury follow. Thank you always, Doc, for your time, your expertise, and your good cheer. And he's back from the abyss.
Yes, I am.
Matt Waldman, just getting to this game, did you expect Hunter Henry to look this comfortable? I mean, when I watched Hunter Henry at Arkansas, hey, Clayton Gray, I saw a player that looked very competent, like a hyper-competent, translating to a hyper-competent player. But he's looking just more at home on an NFL field than we're used to seeing tight ends look this early in his career. What are your early thoughts watching him on the field, NFL field, compared to what you saw in college?
Honestly, not much has changed because he's still. I mean, I'm going to start negative and then end in a positive. And the negative is that he still can't block at the line of scrimmage very well. But what he was always a intermediate pass receiver who can get open in the middle of the field, and he's smooth in and out of his routes and finding the open zones. And the Chargers are giving him extra help by basically letting players run off zones so that he can get into open areas. But one of the things that he is doing nicely is being able to make some double moves. He's obviously reliable catching the football, though he did have, he's had some rookie bumps along the way, like that fumble that cost him the game against the Colts. But he's benefiting a lot in the red zone from formations and usage of using him in ways where they can, make him look like a blocker or pass protector and then use him as an outlet outside the field, or letting Gates or somebody else be the primary focus. And the defense is kind of shifting towards that side and then not paying as much attention to what they're doing with Henry. So when I look at it, I'm not seeing anything of high level of difficulty that you would expect from him to do that would say, oh, he's on the level of Rob Gronkowski. He's on the level of, Greg Olsen, or on the level of any veteran tight end who's asked to get open one-on-one with guys on a consistent basis. But what I am seeing is that they're finding ways to match him up against vulnerable players, guys who Evan Coleman whooped the number 51 out there, for instance, and he's doing his job. And they found also that he fits very well as a kind of an H-back, wing-back blocker, and they can use him in that way as well. So kudos to him for being comfortable, but to me it's kind of like, what you like is that he's minimized his mistakes, and the Chargers are putting him in position to do things that he's always been comfortable with.
And of course, any year now could be Gates' last year, and there he is, potentially inheriting that role with Phillip Rivers, now in the top 10 all-time passing yards. So if you are not following Matt Harmon's work closely at Football Guys at NFL.com, you should know that the next-gen stats that you often see flashed up there, this is the latest feather in your cap, Mr. Harmon, and you've got a great column. And this week's column, give us some highlights of what you get to put your head under the hood and take a look at some of these statistics, measurements now that we didn't have access to before, and some of us don't have access to now. So let us peek it through the keyhole with you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of fun stuff going on with the next-gen stats. And, last year when I got there, a lot of the emphasis was on the speed stuff, because that was the thing that we knew for sure, that this was accurate, and the tracking data. And if you're not familiar with what they're doing, every player has a chip inside their shoulder pad. So everybody is tracked, GPS style around the field. So you get a lot of really interesting metrics out of it. They generate those route charts that you'll see me tweet out there, pretty much right after the game. So it's really groundbreaking stuff. Some of the metrics that I've been looking at lately that I'm really interested in are the distance traveled per yard gain for running backs, for receivers. And there's some interesting kind of correlations. One that I've been looking at is the running backs, and the distance traveled per rush yard gain seems to really correlate heavily to like power running backs. You see guys that are running downhill, making decisions quickly. Those guys tend to have lower figures there. Some of the highlights right now that I've been looking at are like guys like Terrance West, Isaiah Crowell are running really more downhill and more aggressive, making more confident decisions this year than in years past. Players like Ezekiel Elliott are really starting to shine in that way too. So there's some interesting ways like that, and I think those are two guys that I wrote about this week in the column, because Green Bay, of course, has the best run defense in the NFL pretty much through the first 5 weeks, but it's kind of a strength-on-strength matchup there, and I detail in the column why Ezekiel Elliott could still have the advantage. And another thing that was really fun to break down was the Patriots' use of two tight ends, which obviously with Brady back, that was the main personnel package on Sunday, and it was so fun to see how they were able to use Gronkowski now that they have a more traditional inline tight end. I think a lot of us expected to be kind of the X factor moving around the formation, but he's pretty much just played inline tight end. Gronkowski moved around the formation. You saw him be able to get a lot of yards after catch that way. So some of their route charts are really interesting in looking at it that way and just seeing how differently the two tight ends are being used there, and just kind of you almost wonder. I write it in the column, this is what it looked like on Sunday, but who knows what it's going to look like next week, because, this is the Patriots we're talking about. And, several other guys like Marvin Jones, John Brown, I think, is in line for a really big day against the Jets secondary, who gave up a ton, one of the longest plays and one of the fastest touchdowns to Sammie Coates last week, and we know John Brown has that speed too. So ton of interesting information that I'm honestly having a blast digging into, and hopefully get to do a lot more with.
Yeah, check that stuff out. It's fantastic. And like you said, I mean, there's things that we're just learning how to tease out some analytical value. Speaking, Matt, I got to revisit on the couch. By the way, Matt Waldman joined me on the couch this week. Are we watching the scenario you actually painted for us, where Devonte Booker wins over the coaches? I mean, we're watching this drive, and I've got to say, I mean, maybe it's just because of the way this offense is running, but Devonte Booker doesn't look at – well, C.J. Anderson looks sluggish compared to Booker. Booker seems to be running with more energy. I mean, as you laid out, this was a coaching staff that wasn't really sold on Anderson. Ownership wasn't really sold on Anderson. As you're watching this tonight, let's check in on that scenario. You're muted.
Thanks. Some of the things that you're seeing is that they're down by 16. They're playing more pass formation sets. They're not holding, and you also have the fact that Booker his tendencies have always been to get downhill fast and sprint through the hole. He's more of a guy that's always been like a stylistic thing with him. He's had to learn more patience, really, whereas C.J. Anderson has a lot more patience. But these are a little bit more of, ISO type of looks, where it's like hit the gap, hit it hard, get downhill. And he's doing that successfully. And I do think that some of that is because the offensive line is better that way. When you can double team, have two double teams like an ISO block does, that takes the pressure off of the offensive line somewhat. And it also asks your running back to hit the crease harder, as opposed to reach blocks on a zone block where it's one-on-one, and you're asking your running back to be a little slower, a little more patient, and to pick and choose opportunities, because there's more pressure on that offensive line from each man. So Booker's just a better fit with these types of run schemes, and I think it's fitting well for him when they are running them. And then on top of it, like I kind of half joked, but I could see it actually being true, is that I was saying, on your show, that C.J. Anderson probably earned kind of the stink eye from John Elway for winning and here he goes, breaking one off to the right side here on 2nd and 4. But I mean, and this is actually more of a zone run, an off tackle zone, and he does that. They don't do a bad job of blocking there, running it at Bosa. But again, there's another holding call though.
Yeah.
so again, if you double team, you probably don't have as much of a difficulty. You don't have to hold, and it's not as much pressure. So it's kind of playing out just as I mentioned there. And then you have John Elway, who again probably didn't like that C.J. Anderson won that negotiation. Probably never felt all that comfortable with them in the first place. And Devonte Booker is his guy, really more than anything else. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's just like, they're very happy to see these events unfold.
Well, this offense, what we're watching tonight, is cruising for something needs to be shaken up. Something needs to be changed. That's the most obvious change they can make. It's going to be interesting to see. Mr. Matt Harmon, you may or should know his work from Reception Perception. Certainly one of the people who, when it comes to wide receivers, we want to know what he has to say definitively, unlike Dr. Gene Bramwell. Sorry, we love you, Gene. How definitive is your answer right now on Cameron Meredith, Mr. Harmon? What have you seen? What do you like? What did you know about him coming into this year? Give us the Reception Perception file emptied out for us on Cameron Meredith.
Yeah, he's actually a player I plan on studying tonight a little more and charting out his last game and putting up an article on Football Guys like I do every week for a brief reception perception look. So To be honest, my real answer is I'm excited to see some more tonight after I dig in. Although watching that game kind of at a cursory glance and on Sunday and then again when rewatching the games during the week, he definitely stood out. He's not a player that I was familiar with at all, quite frankly, coming into this year. Not really a guy that was on my radar in terms of somebody that could even like contribute in a surprise fashion. You know, he's someone that really came out of nowhere for me.
But to interject really quickly, I remember when Eddie Royal got concussed, I asked one of the beat writers for the Bears who's most likely to benefit playing time wise, and they said Josh Bellamy. So I think that Meredith has really won over a lot of people in a short period of time in that organization. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good thing to see. I mean, anytime you could see a young player make that kind of strides in a short amount of time is a really nice thing to see. He's definitely a guy that has size. He's got some good athletic ability, somebody that can, you know, he seems to be disciplined in his movements and everything and not too indecisive. And I like that a lot in a young receiver. You're kind of seeing the same thing with Tyrell Williams a little bit, just a little, you know, Williams is more overwhelmingly athletic and more of a big play threat. But I think you certainly see enough from Meredith, if, you know, again, from a cursory glance, as a player that could, you know, really make his mark as a contributor. And it's weird what's going on in Chicago right now. I've said this whole year that the Alshon Jeffrey situation is the most confusing thing in fantasy football right now, and just football in general, maybe what his usage and how it seems to be basically anybody else is going to get a ton of targets, but not Alshon. So with him there, I think that the kind of writing is on the wall that the Bears might not want to invest in Alshon, you know, going forward. So I think for dynasty owners, for future endeavors, Meredith might be a guy who can make his mark and at least be a contributor the rest of the way and going forward for Chicago.
Yeah, unlike, and we may get a chance, I want to pick your brain about Sammie Coates too. Unlike Sammie Coates, I think you pointed out something very important. Meredith looks like he knows what he's doing out there on every play. I mean, his moves are with confidence and intent for a second-year receiver. So I want to revisit a question you asked, actually, or actually Matt Harmon asked, but I'm going to turn this around on you, Matt Waldman, about Josh McCown. As Harmon laid out, there's a lot of interesting pieces in your Cleveland Browns offense there, Matt Waldman. We may see Josh McCown in the next week or two, not this week, but obviously it's a big change in the complexion of this offense if you go from Kessler to McCown. Now, how long will McCown last? We don't know, but who might you pinpoint as the biggest beneficiary? How big of an effect can Josh McCown have, his return, on a Cleveland offense that it still feels like it may be fun again before the year's over?
Well, I think really probably the biggest benefit is going to be the downfield passing game. So that means really all the outside receivers. That means Corey Coleman when he returns. It means Terrell Pryor at that very moment. And then also you've got Barnage when it comes to him being able to run some of these deeper corner routes, sail routes, deep seam routes. I think that it's really just going to expand the passing game, which means that it's going to be more efficient from a yard per target type of standpoint. And that's what's going to help out the most, as long as that they can, you know, keep him upright and keep him from getting hurt. Kessler's more of a Trevor Siemian type of player. I mean, it's a quick game type of thrower who, you know, really you need to have him throw the intermediate routes more to the same side of the field. You're not going to stretch the field horizontally a lot. And it's the type of thing where it's more of just, hopefully he can get that first or second quick read within, that first 1.8 seconds of his drop, and maybe have to hitch and somewhere under 3 seconds they can get that ball downfield, whereas they can operate some of those deeper drops with McCown and get something out of it. So, and you also just have the veteran presence, someone who's going to recognize a little bit more in the passing game and be able to make some adjustments because he's more knowledgeable about this offense and has absorbed a little bit more through just, his veteran acumen for the position. So to me, it helps those guys probably more than anything. And then that deeper end of the field. And it probably also helps Isaiah Crowell a little bit more just as an ancillary benefit because of the fact that teams have to be a little more conscious about that downfield passing game and can't just sit on the receivers on those routes.
You have to like the Josh McCown streamer prospects too, just because Cleveland's defense is so bad. There'll be some high scoring games here, and we're seeing San Diego trying to just get this one to the end with 12:44 and turning on my clock. I know we're at different points in the game. So I teased it already, Mr. Harmon. Sammie Coates, and you coined the term Kelvin Coaster, I believe. Kelvin Coaster ain't got nothing on the Coates coaster.
Yes.
But you get a nice prize at the end of your ride on the Coates coaster, and this is a situation where Waldman and I have been talking. You and I have been talking about Coates. Waldman and I have been talking about Coates and Kelvin Benjamin. It's interesting because Waldman, I remember you and I having similar conversations about Kelvin Benjamin as we had about Sammie Coates, and the idea being this: that a player can have fundamental flaws in his game, but be able to add so much value on the plays that he converts and otherwise create tactical value even on the plays he doesn't convert, where the defense has to account for him, that you tolerate all of these bumps in the road. Now, with Kelvin Benjamin, Mr. Harmon, it's maybe more concentration, full-out effort on every rep. With Sammie Coates, there are actually some things that it seems like, I don't know if his brain is just kind of a half beat behind the play sometimes, or it just doesn't issue the correct instructions to his body on how to make a play on the ball. But as we're seeing in this role, in this offense, all he has to do is really capitalize on his physical tools and convert some of the plays. Or does that match what you're seeing, or do you think, hey, this was the Jets, and let's not get ahead of ourselves?
I think maybe somewhere in the middle there, but I think that you talked about the next gen stats column that I write, and one thing that I talked about going into this week was that the Steelers were beginning to put more and more on his plate. If you looked at his route charts from about week 2, you would see he's pretty much just running those streaks, the vertical go routes, and that's where he's getting targeted pretty much exclusively. But then in week 4 against the Chiefs, put more on his plate, and then actually tweeted out again his week 5 chart, and you saw even more different varieties of routes. Nothing too nuanced or complex or, something that you'd expect like an Antonio Brown to run, but a little bit of like a Martavis Bryant light sort of role. I have contended for a long time and still contend that he is not, nor will he likely ever be the player that Martavis is, who I think gets, kind of doesn't get enough credit for some of the other things that he did beyond just big plays and things of the like. But Coates certainly looks like he has that role locked down. It's only getting bigger. So, that's exciting from a fantasy perspective. The Steelers, we've seen, I think, enough right now to know that they are, a much better team at home. We know that they play down to their competition at times. Again, Mike Tomlin, Ben Roethlisberger, those guys have been together for a long enough time. We kind of get the drift there. So I think you've got to know the Steelers are probably going to, kick the doors out of their team at home. Then I think you want Coates in your lineup at that point, no matter what, to just ride that coaster. But you're right. His mistakes, I think, are still present. They'll always be present. And I think those are things that will keep his, ceiling diminished from like a real life NFL player perspective. Because there are times when you throw that guy the ball and he's going to drop it. Before you throw it that he's going to drop it, you see it. And he almost knows it too. After that one, like where he just hit the ground after he dropped it in the end zone, it's almost like, I can't believe I just did that again. Like you mentioned, it's almost not even like he's doing anything technically wrong, or it happens a step slow. He just can't track the ball correctly. It is really inexplicable. And I know that bothers a lot more people than it does bother me, because what he does tactically for the offense, what he does on his own when he actually converts those plays is really big. It's really important. I thought this year might have been lost after that disastrous preseason, but it's been good to see the Steelers and each week again put a little bit more on his plate. So if he plays this Sunday, I'll be again interested to really track his usage and see what we have there.
Yeah, and as you said, putting more on his plate, trusting him after a poor preseason, and as I was saying to Matt Waldman on our show on the couch this week, that physically he's translated. In other words, the advantages that he had over SEC players, he seems to have over NFL players. And, well, that is something. And it looks like this game is starting to get out of hand here, as there's going to be a penalty in the end zone on the Broncos that's going to give us, it looks like, a safety. And, again, I think the Broncos, it's going to be so interesting. It's a team that started 4-0, back to the drawing board here. And I think another thing to point out is between San Diego, and it's really interesting because San Diego's 2-4, but they know they're as good. I mean, they should be 5-1. I mean, 58-minute games, they would be 5-1, and I'm blooming them, by the way. But it's the way Trevor Siemian in this offense is playing, I feel comfortable that I'm not actually blooming the Chargers tonight because they just can't get the engine to turn over on offense. But also, you're seeing an actual, unlike the Vikings defense, you're seeing something exposed these last 2 weeks. Now, granted, good quarterbacks or competent quarterbacks that can execute a game plan in Ryan and Rivers, but certainly the Broncos team, and we see how much things change over a pretty short period of time in the NFL season, that the Broncos are now a team with a little bit of crisis here. Crisis, Matt Waldman, in Washington without Jordan Reed. What's your knee-jerk reaction here of how this offense will change? And again, in fantasy, we tend to too often just reapportion stats, take the pie and chop it up differently. Jordan Reed's an extremely important player. Maybe the answer here is just, I don't know how to re-chop it up, but it gets small enough, especially for Kirk Cousins, that this becomes a much less attractive offense. Are there any pieces of it that get more attractive with Reed out? What do you think about Vernon Davis, Niles Paul, et cetera, et cetera? Unmute.
You.
All right. I was thinking that maybe Vernon Davis gets a little bit more. I think Jamison Crowder gets a little bit more in the middle of the field, and maybe they go towards more of those 11 personnel sets. I'm not sure, but to me, I think that the potential downside of this is that it may enforce Kirk Cousins to take chances that I've always said that he takes too many of. And I always say that his reach exceeds his grasp when it comes to, he doesn't see a difficult throw under pressure across the field that he doesn't try when he doesn't have the arm strength to complete it. I actually showed something on my Instagram where Cousins completes a 25-yard pass on an intermediate cross to Deshaun Jackson while he has a defender bearing down on him, and he puts all his effort into it. And he gets it only because Jackson is so wide open in that area of the field, and it's not the type of throw that you needed high velocity to make. But then you could show, in contrast, Matt Stafford, who has an Eagles defender bearing down on him, and he just fades away and flicks it, and it goes 20 yards downfield like he's playing catch with a little kid 5 yards away. And you can see the difference in that type of arm strength that where Cousins, though, thinks he has Matt Stafford's arm strength, and tries these types of throws. And he tends to have interceptions created from these types of plays more often than not, but he makes just enough of them without discerning what the difference is between the ones he made and the ones he missed, that he's still encouraged to do them. And I just have a feeling that this is, without a guy like Reed who's getting open in the middle of the field, if Vernon Davis isn't consistent enough, and it just hasn't seemed like he's been consistent enough for a few years now, then it may force Cousins to hold on to the ball a little bit longer and take more chances. And I think that's ultimately what could happen, is we could see a little bit more of a downside from him than what we have thus far. And he reverts back to being a mid-range QB2 rather than a low-end QB1.
And maybe I'm Jay Gruden, and I'm drawing the connection in my mind to Andy Dalton too quickly. But I just think of Andy Dalton, that whenever everything is going according to plan and you have advantages that you can isolate and capitalize on, Andy Dalton's a solid quarterback. Whenever the game forces Andy Dalton to improvise, to overcome adversity, to face a tough defense or a tough pressure situation, usually you see a failure. And I wonder if we're going to see that be more the trajectory of Kirk Cousins' season, unless Jordan Reed can get back on the field soon, which, of course, is what we all hope. And a bit of an onside free kick, or a free kick where you pop it up high enough that an offensive lineman has to field it. And the Broncos are still alive. The Bloom alert is still on. Let's talk about
yeah, right.
Go ahead.
I mean, come on. This is, I was just popped on Twitter real quick, and everybody is in it. Here we go. This is how it starts. And
this is.
you got to wonder, if you're the team, do you feel that way too?
Yeah.
That's the worst.
Well, Matt Waldman, you're a great football philosopher, and I love by the way that you're making that face. I mean, this is something that does start to be on the mind. I mean, self-fulfilling prophecies. Here we go again. I mean, this is a real thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, is a real thing. I mean, if you take emotion out of the game, then you're in a situation where you don't really understand human interaction. I mean, and human interaction impacts everything. These aren't robots playing this game. So even though the NFL wants to make them that way in media interviews, but I would say that,
No comment.
I mean, well, that's fine. But, when I'll comment more about that one, and I'll just go ahead and say this, which is that when you have guys who train pros before they get into the NFL and tell them specifically, what they think of the media, what the worst part of the media will do to you, and what you need to be aware of as an immature young man who wants to get more mature about how to handle the media. The best possible thing to do is to be boring, filled, cliche jukebox, that you put the coin in with a question and the most banal answer comes out. So when you look at these types of situations though on the field, it's much different. And just like anybody else, if you've lost games that you should have won, multiple times this season, you can't help but feel like, oh no, this is going to happen. I mean, there are some players who have very short memories and are able to do that, but they're special. Not every player's a shutdown cornerback. Not every quarterback's Brett Favre. Not every quarterback or Phillip Rivers for that matter. So you're going to have guys on this team who just one mistake after another and they get into quicksand. And, this team seems to be always at the edge of the quicksand pit.
Yeah, it's terrible too because these things have not really been the fault of poor Phillip Rivers, who always seems to be put in a bad situation. Put in a good situation, Matt Harmon, and you're certainly the first person that comes to mind and the only person that comes to my mind. Feel free to add a name if you like. On the Terrance West bandwagon, and you were on the Terrance West bandwagon in the summer. Now everything's coming up Terrance West. And what's interesting here is, even though everything's coming up Terrance West in the sense that an offensive coordinator got fired the week after he only got 11 carries, I still think he's cheap. I still think, and Matt Waldman did a good job laying out how Kenneth Dixon, who very few people, if anyone, were more excited to see Dixon play, just doesn't look quite ready yet. So West has a window. What puts you on West, and how confidently would you tell people right now to go out and get him based on what you've seen?
Well, first of all, in terms of what put me on West, I would say that that's a two-part answer. The first part being, the actual, he looked really good in the preseason. He looked like a different player, somebody that was running more decisively. And just in general, I'm not one to write off what you hear from a team in the summer, and that's that he was making steps as not only a running back, but also as an individual, and was more dedicated and had put the past behind him. And so that brings me to kind of the second reason why I was on Terrance West so heavy is because, in terms of who else is on the Terrance West bandwagon, my colleague Chris Wessling at NFL was another guy that really noticed the change took the training camp report seriously. He and I were talking last week in the office about it. We each have our hills or our biggest pet peeves and our axe to grind, and his is that you trust your eyes. You see a guy playing well in the preseason again, and you don't just try to write that off immediately. And mine is that players change, things change. Again, like Waldman said, these are human beings that make progress as not only players but also as individuals. And I cannot stand how fantasy players in particular, and it just pretty much anybody that observes the sports puts a guy in a box after just a few games, and then they just completely write off, that this could ever change, that this is something that we never – and I know that that's not something that any of us do on this program. So that's why I'm happy to come from our little family tree here. When the winds are changing, we're happy to move with them. And this has really been the year for that. I mean, these wayward soul running backs, and I think West is a guy that is in prime position. And the other reason was that, like you mentioned, I expected Kenneth Dixon to start slow. I mean, people have been trying to put in the Hall of Fame pretty much since he was drafted by the Ravens. Even last week when I was tweeting about Terrance West, it's, well, what about Kenneth Dixon? What about when Kenneth Dixon comes back? I like Kenneth Dixon as much as the next guy, maybe not as much as Matt Waldman, but he's still a fourth-round rookie that missed a ton of time. He wasn't going to come in and just take a feature back role. And I like the way Waldman broke it down on the couch. And I think the month of October and maybe even early November is going to be he's the most competent back they have between the tackles right now. Maybe that's Dixon going forward, but like you mentioned, Sigmund, he got the offensive coordinator fired, but because he was almost essentially ignored and because the quarterback had issues with the scheme as well, they made a big change, and I think you'll come out and see them committed to him. And the Giants' run defense has been, kind of crumbling the last few weeks. They gave it up to Eddie Lacy. They gave it up to Jerick McKinnon and company on the previous Monday Night Football game. So I expect to see the Giants kind of roll over this week, at least on the ground, and Terrance West to have another good game. So I would go out and field offers and try to see what you can get West for right now, because I think that you're right. People still don't seem to know what they have in him.
No, well, at least with the opportunity they have in him, with the commitment to the run and the way he's playing, just running with a lot more energy, a lot more violence to his game. Just a couple more minutes here before we'll shuffle on here and leave you to see if Denver can score, overcoming some penalties. Now that they've got a goal-to-go situation, still down 18 points. So it'd be in a season of epic losses if the Chargers somehow blow this one. But while we've got you here, Matt Harmon, I want you to give us any insight, because I still think that, and generally this is how it plays out, so it's good that it's the default. But the default is Odell Beckham's going to be fine. He's Odell Beckham. Don't worry about how things started. Worry about how things finish. And I suppose there's an Eli Manning layer to this. And Eli Manning at different points in his career has kind of gone off the reservation as a player, but then eventually come back. So that's something that we've dealt with. But from the perception lens, as you've been watching Odell Beckham, what can you add to the picture here? Is the smart angle here really, hey, greatness is going to be great, just give it time, or is there something more happening here?
Well, I mean, greatness is always going to be great, and I believe Beckham is still a great player. The off-field stuff aside, or even, how it translates to the on-field, whether people are getting in his head, this, that, or the other, he's, taking more time to take shots at players instead of, actually playing the game. That's a whole nother discussion, but he's still a great player in my mind. He was absolutely pristine against Josh Norman and the Washington in week 3. So, he's still a player that I think is at his peak. He hasn't taken a step back from an individual standpoint from what he was early in his career. The issue for us, and when talking about fantasy, is that sometimes how good you are, it doesn't really matter, because there are other factors that go into putting up fantasy points. And right now, I have a lot of questions about those other factors, especially how it relates to the Giants. You mentioned Eli Manning has looked, frankly, just abysmal this year. He's looking like confused, disconcerted, all around watching him play. He doesn't look in tune with the game, which is weird, because the big incentive to keep Ben McAdoo was to keep things consistent. He had helped Manning kind of take a next step in his career, but you wonder if that's really continuing into the third year there with McAdoo and now him as a head coach. And we talk about this all the time, that head coaching and offensive coordinator are two different skill sets. Same thing with being a defensive coordinator too. You have to wonder if now McAdoo as the head coach has taken away from his ability to game plan an offense, because this offense has a clear strength right now. Those 3 receivers are tough to stop. They're tough to cover. They might be the best trio in the league, but this offense is so dismal because they can't protect. They can't consistently run the ball, and their supposed big-time quarterback is not playing well. So I don't really have a lot of questions about Beckham from an individual standpoint, but in terms of how this is going to relate to fantasy, that's the problem with fantasy football, is that a lot of it matters about those other factors. And for right now, I have a lot of questions with those factors. But, as you mentioned, Eli Manning could, wake up, throw some water on his face, and get back out there at any moment, and everything will be okay. So I would, if I had Beckham, I would not be looking to sell, or maybe you adjust expectations for a while, but not forever.
Yeah, we see more bad Eli, and you bring up a great point. We could do a whole show on this idea that the quality of play for a player doesn't always translate to fantasy points for reasons that are out of his control. This is like wins are not a quarterback stat. Well, guess what? No stat in football is an individual stat. There is no such thing as an individual holding penalties by an offensive line. But even that gets into does he trust the guys around him and so on. But we trust always Matt Waldman, Matt Harmon, Dr. Gene Bramall, who is always a good sport here. Matt Waldman, any parting thoughts before we go off into the sunset this Thursday evening?
None at all, man. It all left with my hair.
Yeah, well, and it's good, though, because there's more room for thoughts up there, more room for Matt Waldman thoughts that we need. And Matt Harmon, touch on next gen stats? Anything in we got the Cameron Meredith piece coming up. Give us anything else going on in the world of Matt Harmon right now.
Oh man, a lot's going on. Hopefully, more things coming down the pike at NFL. Maybe some things in the future that are even better than what we're doing now. So it's all really exciting. I'm just lucky to be here, man. So if you're following along with my work, I appreciate that, and it's good to always come back and talk with you guys. It's a pleasure, man. This football season has been a weird, unexpected one, but I feel like we say that every year, and it's like, why are we expecting anything to go as expected? We ought to just realize, like, going into it, hey, we're going to be throwing our hands up in shock in week 4, and it'll all be business as usual. But yeah, so a lot of cool stuff going on at NFL.com. Not just with me, but with a lot of people doing they're doing a lot of great work. So make sure you follow along.
Sorry, we got a little overlap there. It's because of the overload of the energy watching the end of this game here. So, everybody, thank you as always for joining us, for giving us this platform. And I am, for one, am especially happy to know that as these next gen stats go online, Matt Baldwin always helping us see the layers and levels beyond the surface in the NFL. So we appreciate y'all. And Cecil Lammey will be back next week. Don't worry. And I'm sure he's going to have a lot of choice things to say about this game. We will see as some winds have changed. Maybe it's not over yet, but certainly Denver's got some questions to answer. Maybe San Diego might have another big question to answer. We will be here to give our best answers, indefinite or definite, here on the Audible for you, because you stay classy.